Relationships are complicated. And when you put that in the context of wars and suffering, the situation becomes even more complicated. And often in fiction, relationships are portrayed in a somewhat utopian way. It seems like everything is easy, like you find someone else very quickly, sometimes by chance, but reality is very different. Relationships are complicated, and when you put that into one of the most chaotic settings in anime, you start to wonder how it's even possible for a relationship to blossom in an environment where it seems almost impossible. But amid all these challenges, Guts and Casca formed a beautiful, yet very painful, and truly unforgettable connection for fans of this anime. Guts and Casca bring traumas into their relationship, and after getting involved, they acquire new traumas. It's very likely that many of you watching this video carry relationship traumas and know how hard it is not to bring that into your next relationship. A relationship can change your life. Lately, there's a strong culture of focusing on yourself, not on relationships, and that's quite interesting. But at the same time, a good relationship can be a strong predictor of well-being. It can be something that gives meaning to someone's life. Research indicates that love is described as having feelings of attraction, attachment, passion, trust, and pleasure, all of which stimulate reward centers in your brain that reinforce the sensation of pleasure. When love is not stressful, its calming influence can promote a state of relaxation that helps buffer or balance a potentially overactive stress response. For someone living in the Middle Ages or under deep stress, love in a relationship could be a good way to balance that stress, precisely because a relationship causes our bodies to release certain hormones that make us feel good. But Berserk is not an anime about romance. In fact, it's an anime with a lot of one-sided interests. Judo loved Casca, but he never made a move for anything to happen between them. It was such a pure love that he never really felt strong jealousy toward Guts. He just wanted to see her happy. Farnese also has one-sided feelings for Guts, and she ends up repressing them precisely because she knows about the bond Guts has with Casca. The relationship between Guts and Casca wasn't even one-sided because neither of them was actually interested in the other. In fact, at the beginning, their relationship was seen as a rivalry, especially from Casca's side, and that was normal. Both of them went through situations that changed their perception of what love is. Both of them went through severe traumas. Traumas can completely shape the way you relate to someone, especially if they happen when you're very young. Trauma is endemic to the human experience. Most likely, all of us will face some traumas during our lives. Trauma, in the classical sense, is a kind of wound to the soul. Paraphrasing the great physician-philosopher Gabor Mate, trauma is not so much what happened, but what happens inside you as a result of what happened. Guts, Casca, you and your partner are all products of past relationships, whether you like it or not. Well, but the couple in Berserk went through severe traumas. Guts was assaulted by another man, and this case was connected to the person who was his father figure, the only father figure he had. And Guts ended up developing a kind of aversion to touch. He doesn't allow other people to touch him. He doesn't let anyone do that. And this was a reflection of what had happened to him. At this point, you already wonder how he's going to have a relationship if he has this fear of being touched. Trauma causes the body to go into survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze. When it happens, these effects can persist, triggering our physiology to release stress hormones like cortisol, which has the side effect of making us feel disconnected and withdrawn, reducing our connection with anyone we love. Additionally, our fight, flight, or freeze response can keep our bodies in a constant state of tension, which interferes with intimacy. Traumatic experiences undermine a person's sense of safety in the world and create a feeling that catastrophe could strike at any moment. That's why people who have gone through some kind of trauma often have a lot of difficulty entering into a relationship, because this intimate contact can trigger various memories. When it comes to trauma, people usually replay the experience in their minds many times and continuously think about what happened. This experience leads to changes in the brain, leaving it marked and causing it to respond with hypersensitivity to threats. After the experience, Guts began to trust people less and also stopped getting close to anyone. It's as if everything and everyone became a kind of threat to him. Guts went through an extreme trauma, but this kind of trauma can also come from other sources. Parental neglect, someone betraying you, being abandoned by someone, or suffering aggression. All these factors can affect your life for years, or maybe even for your entire life. Studies show that early life stress disrupts dopamine signaling, altering social motivation and behavior. Scientists found that mice raised in stressful conditions were less likely to engage in social interactions compared to those with enriched experiences. In other words, you may end up with a predisposition not to form relationships, just like Guts. The study identified a weakened neural pathway between the ventral tegmental area and the basolateral amygdala as a key factor. Using advanced techniques to activate or silence dopaminergic neurons, the researchers were able to artificially restore or suppress social motivation in mice. This suggests that social avoidance behavior may stem from disrupted neural circuits rather than inherent personality traits. In other words, some people may be introverted, more withdrawn, or more isolated precisely because of traumas related to social issues, which is what happened with Guts. And it took him a long time to recover from that. It took a long time for him to trust a group again. Casca, on the other hand, was almost assaulted, almost went through a situation similar to Guts's. When she was about to be assaulted, Griffith appears to her, gives her a weapon, and Casca has the opportunity to save herself, to protect herself on her own. And it's interesting how it shows, right, just how complex the issue of attachment is. Because of that, Casca became attached to Griffith. She associated that image of a savior with him. The bond that Casca has with Griffith was extremely strong. This involved jealousy and the desire to have him all to herself. All of us in a relationship have the desire to be accepted and validated, but for Casca it was something bigger than that. She wanted to be accepted as his woman, while at the same time she wanted to be validated as a warrior, as someone useful to him. And that's where the point comes in that both Guts and Casca meet, and it creates a kind of conflict between the two. When Guts joins the Band of the Hawk, he draws Griffith's attention, and this makes Casca feel a kind of jealousy toward him. So, the validation she needed from Griffith was in some way threatened. But Casca has a certain distance from Griffith, and over time that distance somehow brings her closer to Guts. It's really interesting to see this change happening, where she goes from someone who distrusted Guts to someone who now trusted him and had strong feelings for him. Casca was surrounded by many men. Maybe the only one who truly made her feel like a woman was Guts. She had this image of being strong and a warrior. That's how she earned the respect of the group. But with Guts, she could be vulnerable. She could be herself. And then, in the midst of all these circumstances, the two of them start a relationship. Technically, no one can start a relationship from scratch because everyone carries some baggage from the past. Unless you're lucky enough to be with someone and stay with them until the end. Yes, that's a stroke of luck if the relationship is good, of course. When it comes to relationships, having more experience doesn't necessarily mean more learning or satisfaction. The more relationships you have, the more conflicts and more traumas as well. Someone who has been betrayed might take years to trust someone again. And that's the point. The trauma stays there, stored away. And then sooner or later, some situation brings that trauma back, and the person, often without realizing it, ends up repeating that behavior or the consequence of that behavior. People who have been betrayed, for example, may take a long time to trust someone and can suffer considerably because they might spend all their time suspecting their partner. In a study, participants who reported greater suspicion of a partner's infidelity experienced more suffering related to suspicion, depression, physical health symptoms, and risky health behaviors. Furthermore, women were more likely to report greater suffering and more physical symptoms, such as headaches or trouble sleeping, while men were more likely to report risky behaviors, such as alcohol and drug use, in response to their suspicions. But both Guts and Casca allow themselves to be vulnerable with each other. They are able to feel comfortable doing this. The study showed that partners who opened up more to each other exhibited reduced symptoms of post-traumatic stress. In turn, less intense post-traumatic stress was linked to a greater sense of healing. Not only that, being inclined to talk to your partner about the trauma was in itself connected to a greater sense of healing. When we enter a new relationship, it might be interesting to explore our partner's past for several reasons that are quite obvious. We are the sum of what has happened to us, and we tend to repeat the past even without realizing it. This conversation can help both of them understand each other, especially if it's carried out with empathy, with each trying to see things from the other's perspective. We can say that the moment when Casca and Guts felt the most at ease and secure was precisely when they realized they were more connected to each other. It's at this point in the anime, in fact, that we see perhaps one of the few moments where there's a sense of calm. Okay, but we're talking about Berserk, where the trauma kind of never ends. It all starts with Griffith being imprisoned and tortured. He becomes unable to fight. Casca is very loyal to Griffith as a warrior, and even though she has the chance to go with Guts, she's inclined to stay and take care of Griffith. She felt it was a kind of obligation. At the same time that she wanted to have a life with Guts, she felt she couldn't leave Griffith behind. This is an important point because maybe we could think that Casca doesn't like Guts that much because of this, but the point is that she was very loyal and faithful to the very first person she ever loved in her life, which was Griffith. And then comes the eclipse scenario, which you all know, the violence that Casca suffered, and this affected both of them tremendously. After that, Guts was never the same again. If it took him years to trust someone again, it would take him even more years to trust once more. Casca survives the situation, but she is left traumatized. She can no longer speak, can't express herself, and is afraid of Guts. Guts decides to stay with her, but now it was a different kind of relationship. Guts would have to take care of her along with other people. For Guts, loving Casca at that moment was also painful because it reminded him of the traumas he had gone through. Guts is the one who literally has to deal with someone who is now completely vulnerable and needs his care almost all the time. He goes through this, he survives the situation, and after Casca regains consciousness, once again he has to deal with her distance, with her fear, precisely because of the traumas she went through, which had nothing to do with him. And Guts, while wanting to be close to her, now needs to give her that space. Studies indicate that partner-oriented thinking, which involves assessing your own feelings and your partner's feelings about the relationship, can lead to greater relationship satisfaction. Often, what your partner needs most is not a solution to their pain, but for you to hold space while they work through it themselves. Meanwhile, Casca is suffering internally, as shown in a scene from the manga that reveals her subconscious, illustrating how tormented she was by these traumas and how difficult it was for her to reconnect with Guts. It was as if neither of them could help the other. Complicated. Relationships are complicated. When it involves someone with trauma, that doubles. When both people have trauma, it can be even harder. But just like the gas in the shell, maybe you'll find in that trauma the space for both to open up to each other. We can't deny the past. Somehow, it will always be there, influencing us in small ways. Pain and suffering are the ways our brain finds to keep us from going through pain again. The past becomes important for us to understand what we no longer want. Guts and Shell suffered alone, suffered in a relationship, suffered in love. Any bond brings pain because it brings a strong fear of loss. Pain comes one way or another, but the pain of a great love is preferable to the emptiness of never having lived it.